That's one thing I'll give the normal Kahuna. He can read just fine. Not like me. But he knows jack squat about introducing something he's working on. So you bring me the ultimate Kahuna. And I'm telling you, 8 p.m. West Coast time, the ultimate Kahuna will give way to the normal Kahuna to do a live reading. You will watch it, and you will enjoy it. Woo!
Normal. Me too.
Kikoman, you're doing it wrong. Woo! And now it's time for a live reading.
Maybe this worked. Sweet. All right. I'll try this. If it doesn't work this time, then I don't know what to tell you. Let's see here. Maybe, yeah. In the latter half of the last century, large numbers of men were employed in the British and American whaling fleets, any of whom would doubtless all the material required for a book. But those were the days when sailoring was tough, and the crew was picked up from the gutters of the ports and licked into shapes by officers who knew how to drive. There's no shirt. Hey, Andrew. The success of this book is very much personal triumph for the author. Frank Billen was 18 when he was shipped aboard the Cachalot. He was over 40 when he wrote The Cruise of the Cachalot. For more than 20 years, the material lay dormant in his mind, locked there by his inability to express himself adequately. For any authors out there, I'm sure you understand that. Maji, your book's coming along nicely. It's not going to take you 20 years. Let me see. Maybe if I can... Here, we'll do this. There we go. There we go. He was born in mean circumstances in Paddington, the son of a drunken, quarreling working man. The date was 1857. An aunt took him in, together with his elder sister, and she supported them and several of her own children by dressmaking. Apparently she gave him some schooling, for he had learned to read before he received his only organized education. A few years at a dame's school, when he was 9, his aunt died, and he was on his own then, and life and the need to earn his own living henceforth provided his only education. For 3 years he lived in the streets, earning a few coppers as errand boy, a ragged, underfed, starving, existing only as best he could. Finally, in desperation, he shook the dust of Dickens' London from his feet. I belonged to the ignoble company of the unwanted. In spite of hard usage, scanty food, and overwork, I ridiculously persisted in living, until, at the approach of my 12th year, an eligible opening presented itself for me to go to the sea. This eligible opening was a cabin boy aboard his uncle's ship, the Arabella. This vessel was so badly found that it was rumored amongst the crew that she was not intended to return. This may have been the case, for on the coast of Mexico his uncle had him transferred to the bark Discoverer for safety, the only kindness he ever showed the boy. From the moment this scrap of kindness From that moment, this scrap of Cockney London became the urchin of the sea, wandering from ship to ship through shipwreck, mutiny, starvation, yellow fever, and shipwreck again. The Discoverer was all skippered by a drunkard and ran up on a coral reef whilst all hands, including the captain, were asleep. After that particularly every ship he sailed, it seemed to be queer. Not in the modern sense, in the much older sense. Let me sit you down here where I originally had you. How about there? As early as this, he was showing a marked interest in reading, and when treated by a kindly captain to 2 weeks aboard, and lodging at Sailor's Home in Liverpool, he goes round in the library, starting on a volume of Captain Cook's voyages, and ceases to have any interest in searching for a ship, unless the state of her finances forces him into the shipmaster's hands. His character, too, is gradually emerging. This may be colored by the fact he is writing of his sea wanderings in middle life, but if we are to believe his own evidence, he is already, at the age of 13 or 14, reacting strongly from the memory of his father's drunkenness, and evincing the beginnings of that marked religious streak that colors most of his later work. Oh, thank you, Maji. Yeah, no, she enjoys it. This tree, I'll show you guys, is an African tree. Ooh, I'm being too loud. I'll have to be quiet. Maybe I'll close that door. He had a little tall mask there. Close this door. No, it's too quiet. I don't think I'll have reception. Okay. Well, blast. I may have been kicked out. That is the only problem with this house. Any sound said with any volume is too loud and will travel over the walls that only go up 7.5 feet. So let's go down here. We can hang out with the alien. Now this little guy, I believe he came from the Sanquis Islands, or Little Alien. So we'll go down here. Yeah, this will work. This will work for now. He became a first contributor of the Morning Leader at £2 a week, and finally, when royalties began to come in, was able to move into the country with his wife and 3 daughters. In the 17 years following the publication of The Cruise of Cachalot, he produced a total of 36 books, supplementing his income by giving lectures all over the country. He died in Madeira on February 26, 1915. I was given the story of his early life in some detail because few writers have made such full use of their adolescent experiences as Bulletin, and indeed, few have packed so much into this period of their lives. Kipling, at the end of his letter, and referring to Bulletin's 2 years on the whaling ground, said, "You have thrown away enough material to make 5 books, and I congratulate you heartily." Reading Bulletin's later work, one is inclined to wish he had taken the hint, for he turned to fiction, and in this field he was out of his depth. But in recording what he had actually observed, felt his writing had a simplicity and honesty. Where'd it go? Had a simplicity and honesty that is quite beautiful, and at his best, his descriptions of scenes and action and natural phenomena were incredibly vivid. There we go. Set you guys atop the rock. Here we go. It is not only that the methods have changed, the opportunity has gone. Whaling is now a highly merchandised industry. Mostly in Antarctica. Never again will men cruise the ocean byways from the Sea of Ospukuk to the Solander grounds, pitting skill and courage against the largest living creature in hand-to-hand combat in its own element. For this reason alone, there can be no new Cruise of the Cachalot, no second Moby Dick. And because of this remarkable little has added to our knowledge of the whale in the last 50 years. Bullen's theories about the feeding habits of the sperm and the origins of the ambergris still hold good today. So, too, do his descriptions of the very human behavior of a cow whale, submitting willingly to death rather than risk injury to her calf. Whales and their habits do not change quickly. A century is but a moment in the evolution of marine life. And so, The Cruise of Cachalot is as fresh today as when it was first written, and we must be eternally grateful to Frank Buehlin for struggling so heroically to master the means of passing on the wonders he has seen. You're lucky. Gosh dang it, Mom. Yes, go ahead. Hopefully it's still working. Outward Bound. Maybe I can put you here. Let's see. We'll go right. It's going to be scuff. How's that? At the age of 18, after a sea experience of 6 years, meaning he first joined a whaling vessel when he was 12 years old, I dodged about London streets, a ragged Arab, with the wits sharpened by the constant fight for food. I found myself roaming the streets of New Bedford, Massachusetts. How I came to be there, of all places in the world, does not concern this story at all, so I am not going to trouble my readers with it. Enough to say that I was there, and mighty anxious to get away. Sailor Jack is always hankering for shore when he is at sea, but when he is outward bound, that is. When all his money is gone, he is like a cat in the rain there. So, as my money was all gone, I was hungry for a ship. And when a long, keen-looking man with a goat-like beard and a mouth stained with dry tobacco juice hailed me one afternoon at the street corner, I answered very promptly, scenting a berth. "Looking for a ship, stranger," he said. "Yes, do you want a hand?" I said anxiously. He made a funny little sound, something like a pony's whinny, and then answered, "Wall, I should surmise I want 50 and 60 hands, if and you knew where to find 'em. But come along, every dreep's a drop, and you's looking like enough." With that, he turned and led the way until he reached a building, around which he gathered one of the most nondescript crowds I had ever seen. There certainly did not appear to be a sailor amongst them. Not so much by their rig, though that was not a great deal to go by, but by their actions and speech. One thing they all had in common: tobacco chewing. As nearly every male I had met in America did that, it was not much to be noticed. I had hardly done reckoning them up that when 2 or 3 bustling men came out and shepherded us all energetically onto a long, low room, where some form of agreement was read aloud to us. Sailors are naturally and usually careless about the nature of articles they sign, their chief anxiety being to get to sea, under somebody's charge. But, but I had never been so anxious to know what I was going to sign this time. I could not, for the language might as well have been in Chinese for all I understood it. However, I signed and passed on, engaged to know I knew not where, in some ship I did not even know the name of, in which I was to receive, I did not know how much, nor how little, for my labor, nor how long I was going to be away. "What a young fool," I heard somebody say. I quite agree. There were a good many more in that ship, as in most ships I have ever sailed in. From the time we signed the articles, we were never left to ourselves. Translucent-looking men accompanied us on set to several boarding houses, paid our debts for us, finally bringing us by boat to a ship lying out in the bay. As we passed under her stern, I read the name Canchalot, of New Bedford. As soon as we ranged aside, I realized I was booked for the sailor's horror, a cruise in a whaler. Badly as I wanted to get to sea, I had not bargained for this. I would have run some risks to get ashore again, but they took no chances. So we were all soon aboard. Before going forward, I took a comprehensive look around, and saw I was aboard a vessel belonging to a type which almost disappeared off the face of the waters. A more perfect contrast to the trim-built English clipper ships that I had been accustomed to, I could hardly imagine. She was one of a class characterized by sailors as built by the mile, and cut off in lengths as you want 'em, bow to stern almost alike, masts standing along as broomsticks, the bowsprit soaring upward at an angle of 45 degrees. She was an old-fashioned in her rig as in her hull. "Hello, Miss Hen," digging her little hole. But I must not go into the technical differences between rigs, for fear of making myself tedious. Right in the center of the deck, occupying a space of about 8 feet by 8 feet, was a square erection of brickwork, upon which my wondering gaze rested longest, for I had not the slightest idea what it could be. I was rudely roused from my meditations by the harsh voice of one of the officers, who shouted, "Now and get below and stow your dunnage, and look lively up again." I took the broad hint and shouldered my traps, hurried forward to the forecastle, which was below deck. Tumbling down the steep ladder, I entered the gloomy den which was to be so long my home, finding it fairly packed with my shipmates. A motley crew they were. I had been used in English ships to considerable variety of nationality. But here were gathered not only representatives of 5 or 6 nations, but longshoremen of all kinds, half of whom had hardly ever set eyes on a ship before. The whole space was undivided by partition, but I saw at once that black men and white had separated themselves, the black taking the port side while the whites took the starboard. Finding a vacant bunk in the dim glimmer of the ancient teapot lamp that hung amidships, giving out as much smoke as light, I hurriedly shifted my coat for a jumper or blouse, put on an old cap, and climbed into the fresh air again. For double reason, even my seasoned head was feeling bad with the villainous reek of the place, and I did not want any of those hard-featured officers on deck to have any cause to complain about my hanging back. On board ship, especially American ships, the first requisite for a sailor who wants to be treated properly is to show willing. Any suspicion of slackness being noted immediately, and the backward one marked accordingly. I had hardly reached the deck when I was confronted by a Negro, the biggest I had ever seen in my life. He looked me up and down for a moment. Then, opening his ebony features with a wide smile, he said, "Great snakes! Why, here's a sailor man for sure. Guess that'll be so, ain't it, Johnny?" I said yes, very curtly. I hardly liked his patronizing air, but he snapped me up short with, "Yes, sir!" And then, when you speak to me, you blank lime juicer, is'm fourth mate of this yar ship, and my name's Meester Jones. You just freeze on that air, and if'n you want, wow, this is hard to read, die happy. See, Sonny? I saw and answered promptly. "I beg your pardon, sir, I didn't know." "Otherwise, you didn't know. That's all right. This little Britisher now just ship aloft and loose that far topple." "Aye, aye, sir," I answered cheerily, springing at once into the fore rigging and up the ratlines like a monkey, but not too fast to hear him chuckle. "That's a smart kitty, I bet." I had the big sail loose in quick time, and snug out, all gone the forestapple, before any of the other sails were adrift. "Lose the topgallant and the staysails," and came up from below like a voice like thunder. I bounded up higher to my task. On deck I could see a crowd of the windlass heaving up anchor. I said to myself, they don't waste any time getting this packet away. Evidently they were not anxious to test any of the crew's swimming powers. They were wise, for she remained at anchor that night, and I verily believe some of the poor wretches would have tried to escape. The anchor came away, the sails were sheeted home, and I returned to the deck to find the ship gathered way for the Heads, fairly started on her long voyage. Oh, thanks, man. Thanks for stopping by. Hey, Bob. How you doing? Oh, yeah, no, we were on the porch. I got kicked out because my kids are sleeping. What a bare garden the deck was, to be sure. The black portion of the crew, Portuguese natives from the Western and Canary Islands, were doing all of their work all right in a clumsy fashion. But the farmers, bakers, and draymen were being driven about mercilessly amid a perfect hurricane of profanity and blows. And right here I must say that, accustomed as I was to bad language all my life, what I now heard was a revelation to me. I would not, if I could, attempt to give a sample of it. But it must be understood it was incessant throughout the voyage. No order could be given without it, under the impression, apparently, that the more curses equaled the more speed. Before nightfall, we were fairly out to sea, and the ceremony of dividing the crew into watches was gone through. I found myself in the chief's mate, or port watch. They called it larboard, a term I had never heard used before, it having been long obsolete in merchant ships. Though the huge negro fourth mate seemed none too well pleased that I was not under his command, his being the starboard watch, under the second mate. As night fell, the condition of the greenies, or non-sailor portion of the crew, was pitiable. Helpless from seasickness, not knowing where to go or what to do, bullied relentlessly by the ruthless petty officers. Well, I never felt so sorry for a lot of men in my life. Glad enough I was to get below decks and forecastle for supper. A brief rest and respite from the cruelty on deck. A bit of salt chunk and a piece of bread, i.e. biscuit. Flinty as a pantile, with a pot of something sweetened with long slick or molasses. Made an apology for a meal, and I turned in. In a very few minutes oblivion came, making me as happy as any man can be in this world. The hideous noise, always considered necessary in those ships when calling the watch, roused me effectively at midnight. 8 bells. I hurried on deck, fully aware that no leisurely 10 minutes would be allowed here. "Lay aft the watch," saluted me, as I emerged into the keen, strong air, quickening my pace according to where the mate stood, waiting to muster his men. As soon as he saw me, he said, "Can you steer?" in a mocking tone. When I quickly answered, "Yes, sir," his look of astonishment was delightful to see. He choked it down, however, and merely telling me to take the wheel, turned to face roaring frantically for his watch. I had no time to chuckle over what I knew was in store for him. Getting those poor greenies collected from the several holes and corners, for on taking the wheel I found a machine under my hands as I have never heard before. The wheel was fixed upon the tiller in such a manner that the whole concern travelled backwards and forward across the deck in the maddest kind of way. For the first quarter of an hour, in spite of the September chill, the sweat poured off of me in streams, and of course, well, it was not steering, it was sculling. The old bumboat was wobbling all around like a drunken sailor with 2 left legs. I fairly shook with apprehension lest the mate should come and look into the compass. I had not been accustomed to hard words if I did not steer within the first half point each way. There was a gadget that worked me to death, and the result being a wake like a letter S. Gradually, I began to get the hang of the thing, becoming easier in my mind on my own account. Even that was not an unmixed blessing, for I now had some leisure time to listen to the going-ons around the deck. "Hello, Alicia. Nice to join you. Or nice for you to join us. Such brutality I have never witnessed before, on board of English ships, except men of war. There is practically no discipline, which is bad, but this sort of thing was maddening. I knew how desperately ill all of those poor wretches were, how helpless and awkward they would be if quite hale and hearty. But there was absolutely no pity for them. The officers seemed to be incapable of any feelings of compassion whatsoever. My heart sank within me as I thought of what lay before me, although I did not fear that their treatment would also be mine, since I was at least able to do my duty, and willing to work hard to keep out of trouble. Then I began to wonder what sort of voyage I was in for, how long it would last, and what my earnings were likely to be. None of which were things I had the faintest idea of. Fortunately, I was alone in the world. No one, as far as I knew, carried a straw what became of me. So I was spared any worry on that head. What an interesting idea, to be completely alone in the world and for that to be a relief, knowing that you're not causing unnecessary emotion and worry on your behalf. Much tougher people back then, I think. At least I suspect. Also, this view is killer, man. I'll never grow tired of this place. But it is getting hot in that sun, so here I am. Let's see. put you here on the alien. There we go. I was relieved by one of the Portuguese, and went forward to witness a curious scene. 7 stalwart men were being compelled to march up and down the tumbling deck. Men who had never trodden upon anything less solid than the earth. The third mate, a waspish, spiteful little Yankee with a face like an angry cat, strolled among them, and a strand of rope yarns in his hand, which he wielded constantly, regardless where he struck a man. They fell about, sometimes 4 or 5 at once, and his blows flew thick and fast. Yet he never seemed to weary of his ill-doing. It made me quite sick, and I longed to be aft at the wheel again. Catching sight of me standing irresolute as to what had better to do, he ordered me on the lookout, a tiny platform between the Knight's Head, where the bowsprites joined the ship. Gladly I obeyed him, and perched up there looking over the wide sea. The time passed away until 8 bells, 4 o'clock, and terminated my watch. I must pass rapidly over the condition of things in forecastle, where all the greenies that were allowed below were groaning in misery from the stifling atmosphere, which made their sickness much, much worse, while even the dreadful place was preferable to what awaited them on deck. There was a rainbow of colored halo round the flame of the lamp, showing how very bad the air was. But in spite of that, I turned in and slept soundly until 7 bells, 7:20 a.m., and roused us for breakfast. Oh, thank you, Animation. Thanks for stopping by, man. I really appreciate it. Sorry I haven't done more streams since I got here and more videos. It's just been tough with the children. A vacation with younger kids is never really a vacation, but I am happy, very happy to be here despite all that. Learned some very interesting things from my grandfather today, the real Kahuna. And perhaps I will share that when I get back. The weather being fine, with a steady northeast wind blowing, so that all the sails required no attention. Work proceeded steadily in the morning. The oars were stowed, examined for flaws, and placed in the boats. The whale line, manila rope like yellow silk, 1.5-inch round, was brought up on deck, stretched and coiled with the greatest care into tubs, holding sometimes some 200 fathoms, and others 100 fathoms each. New harpoons were fitted to poles of rough but heavy wood, without any attempt at neatness, but every attention to strength. The shape of these weapons was not, as is generally thought, that of an arrow, but rather an arrow with one huge barb, the upper part curved out from the shaft, the whole of the barb turned out into a stout pivot of steel. But that was kept in line with the shaft, but a tiny wooden peg which passed through the barb and the shaft, being then cut off smoothly on both sides. The point of the harpoon had on one side a wedge-shaped edge, ground to razor keenness. The other side was flat. The shaft, about 30 inches long, was the best malleable iron, so soft it would tie into a knot and straighten out again without fracture. Fu Man Blue, what's up? Let's see. Opposite to them in the boat were fitted 3 lances for the purpose of killing whales, the harpoons being the only means by which the boat was attached. Oh, sorry, thin pages. To a fish, and quite useless to inflict a fatal wound. These lancers were slender spears of malleable iron about 4 feet long, with oval or heart-shaped points of fine steel, about 2 inches broad. Their edges kept keen as a surgeon's lancet, would, by means of a socket all the way at the other end, were attached to neat handles, or lance poles as long again as the whole weapon, being about 8 feet in length, and furnished with a light line, or lance warp, for the purposes of drawing it back again when it had darted at a whale. Each boat was fitted with a centerboard or a sliding keel, which was drawn up when not in use, and into a case standing on the boat's middle, very much in the way, but the American whalemen regard was these clumsy contrivances as indispensable. So there's an end. I'm not sure what that word is. The other furniture of a boat comprised 5 oars of varying lengths, 16 to 9 feet, one great steering oar at 19 feet, a mast and 2 sails of great area for so small a craft, the spritsail shape, 2 tubs of whale line containing together 1,800 feet, a keg of drinking water, and another long narrow one with a few biscuits, a lantern, and candles and matches therein, a bucket and piggin for bailing, a small spade, a flag or weft, a shoulder bomb gun, and ammunition, 2 knives, 2 small axes. A rudder hung outside by the stern. With all this gear, although snugly stowed, a boat looked so loaded that I could not help wondering how 6 men would be able to work in her. But like most deep-water sailors, I knew very little about boating, and I was about to learn. All of this work and bustle of preparation was so rapidly carried out, and so interesting, that before supper time everything was in readiness to commence operations. The time had gone so swiftly that I could hardly believe the bell when it sounded 4 times at 6 o'clock. Big oar. That's funny. All right. Fishing begins. During all the bustle of warlike preparation that had been going on, the greenhorns had not suffered from inattention on part of those appointed to look after them. Happily for them, the wind blew steadily, and the weather, thanks to the balmy influence of the Gulf Stream, was quite mild and genial. The ship was undoubtedly lively, as all good sea-boats are, but her motions were by no means so detestable that a seasick man as those driving the steamer. So, in spite of her treatment, perhaps because of it, some of the poor fellows were beginning to take hold of things man fashion. Although, of course, sea legs they had none. Their getting about were indeed a pilgrimage of pain. Some of them were beginning to try the dreadful grub. I cannot label food by using it in such a connection, thereby showing that their interest in life, even a life as was now before them, was returning. They all had been allotted places in the various boats, intermixed with the seasoned Portuguese in a way that the officer and the harpooner in charge would not be dependent upon them entirely in case of sudden emergency. Every endeavor was undoubtedly made to instruct them in their duties, albeit the teachers were all too apt to beat their information in with anything that came to hand, and persuasion found no place in their methods. You guys are too much. A regular and severe routine of labor kept up, and, what was most galling to me, instead of a regular 4 hours watch, on and off, day and night, all hands were kept on deck the whole day long, despite doing quite unnecessary tasks, apparently with the object of preventing too much leisure and consistent brooding over their unhappy lot. One result of this continual drive and tear was that all of these landsmen became rapidly imbued with the virtues of cleanliness, which was extended to the den in which we lived, and I verily believe sickness would have soon thinned us out. On the 4th day after leaving port, we were all busy as usual, except for the 4 men in the crow's nests, when a sudden cry of "Porps! Porps!" brought everything to a standstill. A large school of porpoises had joined us, as in their usual clownfish fashion, rolling and tumbling about the bows as the old barkie wallowed along, surrounded by the wild eclipse of snowy foam. All work was instantly suspended, and active preparations made for securing few of these frolicsome fellows. A block, or pulley, was hung out towards the bowsprit end. A whale line passed through it and bent, fastened to a harpoon. Another line with a running bowline, or slip noose, also passed out to the bowsprit end, being held there by a man in readiness. Then one of these harpooners ran back along the back ropes, which kept the jib boom down, taking his stand beneath the bowsprit with the harpoon ready. For those who love animals, especially dolphins, spoiler, this may not end well for the dolphins. Presently he raised his iron and followed the track of a rising porpoise with its point until the creature broke water. At the same instant the weapon left his grasp, apparently without any force behind it. But we on deck, holding the line, soon found that our excited hauling lifted a big vibrating body clean of the smother beneath. "Vast hauling!" shouted the mate, while as the porpoise hung dangling, the harpooner slipped the ready bowline over the body, gently closed his grip around the small by the broad tail. Then we hauled up the noose line, slacking away the harpoon, and in a minute had our prize on deck. He was dragged away at once, and the proper operation started. Once again we hauled them in, and until the fore part of the deck was alive with the kicking, writhing sea pigs, at least 20 of them. I had seen an occasional porpoise caught at sea before, but never more than one at a time. Here, however, was a wholesale catch. At least one of the harpooned ones plunged so fiercely while being hauled up he literally tore himself off the iron, falling, streaming with blood, back into the sea. Uh, this book is not dirty. No, no, no. But I would love to hear a PETA representative or a passionate member read this. This is how things kind of were back then. Porpoises have no skin, that is, hide. The blubber, or coating of lard that encases them, being covered by a black substance as thin as tissue paper. The porpoise hide of the bootmaker is really leather, made from the skin of a beluga, or white whale, which is found only in the far north. The cover was removed from the try-works amidships, revealing two gigantic pots, set in the frame of brickwork side by side, capable of holding 200 gallons each. But such a cooking apparatus as might have engraced the Brobdingnagian kitchen beneath the pots was the very simplest of furnaces, hardly as elaborate as the familiar copper hole sacred to washing day. Square funnels of sheet iron were loosely fitted to the flutes, more as a protection against the oil boiling over into the fire than to carry away the smoke. Which came from the particular nature of the fuel, there was very little. At least one side of the try-works was a large wooden vessel, or hopper, to contain the raw blubber. At the other, the copper cistern had a cooler of about 300 gallons capacity, into which the prepared oil was balled off to cool off. The preliminary to its being poured into the casks. Beneath the furnaces was a space as large as the whole area of the try-works, about a foot deep, which, when the fires were lighted, was filled with water to prevent the deck from burning. It may be imagined that the blubber from our 20 porpoises made but a poor show in one of those pots. Nevertheless, we got a barrel of excellent oil from them. The fires were fed with scrap, or pieces of blubber, which went into the oil after the oil had been boiled, some of which had been reserved from the previous voyage. They burnt with a fierce, steady blaze, leaving but a trace of ash. I was then informed by one of the harpooners that no other fuel source was ever used for boiling blubber at any time, there always being an ample sufficience for the purpose. The most interesting part of the whole business, though, to us, poor half-starved wretches, was the plentiful supply of fresh meat. Porpoise beef is, when decently cooked, fairly good eating to a landsman. Judge, then, what it must have been to us. Of course, the titbits, such as the liver, brains, kidneys, etc., could not possibly fall to our lot. But we did not complain. We were much too thankful to get something edible, and enough of it. Moreover, along with a few sailors and English ships although few sailors in English ships know it. Porpoise beef improves vastly by keeping and getting tenderer every day the longer it hangs, until it is until at last it becomes as tasty as a viand and could as one could wish to dine upon. It was a good job for us that this was the case, for while the porpoises lasted, the harness. Hello. Oh, good night, Fu Man Blue. Thanks for joining us, man. Real angler porn. Yeah, a little bit. This is based on his real life story, so not a bad view. Maybe I should get out of it. We were now in the haunts of the sperm whale, or cachalot, a brilliant lookout being continually kept for any signs of their appearing. One officer and a foremast hand were continually on watch all day in the main crow nests. One harpooner and one seaman in the fore one. A bounty of 10 pounds of tobacco was offered to whoever first reported a whale. Should it be secured, consequently, there were no sleepy eyes up there. Of course, none of those who were inexperienced stood much of a chance against the eagle-eyed Portuguese, who all tried their best in hope of perhaps winning some little favor from their hard taskmaster. Every evening at sunset, it was all hands shorten sail, the constant drill rapidly teaching each of the clumsy landsmen how to find their way aloft, and do something besides hold on to the anything but grim death when they got there. At last, one beautiful day, the boats were lowered and manned, and away went the greenies on their first practical lesson in the business of the voyage. As before noticed, there were two greenies in each boat, they being so arranged that whichever one caught a crab, which of course was about every other stroke, his failure to make made little difference to the boat's progress. They learned very fast under the terrible imprecautions and storm blows from the iron-fisted and iron-hearted officers, so that before the day was out, the skipper was satisfied in our ability to deal with a fish, should he be lucky enough to raise one. I was, in virtue of my experience, placed at the after oar in the mate's boat, where it was my duty to attend to the main sheet. When the sail was set, I also had the benefit of the lightest oar, except the small one used by the harpooner in the bow. The very next day, after our first exhaustive boat drill, a school of blackfish was reported from aloft, and with great glee the officers prepared what they considered a rattling day's fun. The blackfish is a small toothed whale, not at all unlike a miniature cachalot, except that its head is rounded at the front and its jaw is not as long and straight, but bowed. It is as frolicsome as the porpoise, gambolling about in schools from 20 or to 50 or more, as if really delighted to be alive. Its average size from 10 to 20 feet long, and 7 or 8 feet in girth, weighing about 1 to 3 tons. Blubber is about 3 inches thick, while the head is almost all oil, so that a rich specimen 1 and 2 barrels of oil of medium quality. The school we were now in sight of was of middling-sized and average-weight individuals, and the officers esteemed it a fortunate circumstance that we should happen across them, as a sort of preliminary to our tackling the monarchs of the deep. All of the new harpoons were unshipped from the boats, and a couple of extra second irons, as those have been used were called, were put into each boat for use if wanted. The sails were also left on board. We lowered and left the ship, pulling right towards the school, the noise they were making in their fun eventually preventing them from hearing our approach. It is affectionately preventing. Oh, it is etiquette to allow the mate's boat first place, unless his crew is so weak as to be unable to hold their own. But as the mate always had first pick of the men, this seldom happens. So, as usual, we were first, and soon I heard the order given, "Stand up, Louis, and let 'em have it." Sure enough, here we were, right amongst them, Louis let drive, fastening a whopper about 20 feet long. The injured animal plunged madly forward, accompanied by his fellows, while Lewis calmly bent another iron into a short warp, and then, or a piece of whale line, the loose end of which he made into a bow line with round the main line which was fast to the fish. Then he fastened another fish, and the queer sight was seen as these two monsters were trying to flee in opposite directions, while a second one was ranged about alarmingly as his bridle ran along the main line. Another one was secured in much the same way. Then the game was indeed great. The school had by this time taken alarm and cleared out, but the other boats were all fast to fish, so that didn't matter. Now, at the rate our game was going, it would eventually be a long while before they died. Although being much smaller than a whale proper, a harpoon will often kill them at a stroke. Yet, they were now so tangled, or snarled as the mate said, that it was no easy matter to lance them without great danger of cutting the line. However, we hauled up as close to them as we dared, and the harpooner got a good blow in, which gave the biggest of the three, Jesse, as he said, though why Jesse was a stumper. Anyhow, it killed him promptly, and while almost directly after another one saved further trouble by passing into his own cheeks, but he sank at the same time, drawing the first one down with him. So, after we were in considerable danger of having them cut adrift or be swamped, the weft was saved thrice, as an urgent signal to the ship to come to our assistance with all speed. But in the meantime, our interest lay in the surviving black fish keeping alive. Should he die, and, as was most probable, sink, we would certainly have to cut loose the lot, tools included. We waited in grim silence as the ship came up, so slowly, apparently, that she hardly seemed to move, but really at a good pace of about 4 knots an hour, which for her was not bad at all. She got alongside us at last, and we passed up the bight of our main line, our fish all safe, very much pleased with ourselves, especially when we found that the other boats only had 5 between the 3 of them. The fish secured to the ship, all the boats hoisted except one, which remained alongside to sling the bodies. During our absence, the ship-keepers had been busy rigging up one of the cutting falls, an immense four-fold tackle from the main lower masthead, a 4-inch rope, though look through great double blocks, largely as those used at dockyards for lifting ships and masts and boilers. The chain slings were passed around the carcasses, which gripped the animal at the small, being prevented from slipping by the broad spread of the tail. The end of the fall, or tackle rope, was then taken to the windlass. We hove away cheerily, lifting the monsters right on deck. A mountainous pile they made. A short spell was allowed, when the whole 8 were on board, for dinner. Then all hands returned again to fletch the blubber, and prepare for trying out. This was a heavy job, keeping all hands busy until it was quite dark, the latter part of the work being carried on by the light of a cresset, the flames of which were fed with scrap, which blazed brilliantly, allowing a big glare all over the ship. The last of the carcasses was launched overboard at about 8 o'clock that evening, but not before some vast chunks of beef had been cut off and hung in our rigging for our food supply. The try works were started again, trying out going on busily all night. Watch and watch taking their turn, keeping the pots supplied with minced blubber. The work was heavy, while the energetic way in which it was carried made us all glad what rest was allowed us, which was scanty enough, as usual. Oh, good, I'm glad. I'll have to call it here soon anyway. Let's see. Oh yeah, Fu Man went off to bed. I feel you. I feel you, King Bob. Nothing like hearing about killing dolphins and freaking killer whales to put you to sleep, right? The try works were started again, trying out, going busily all night. Watch and watch taking their turn to keep the pot supplied with minced blubber. By nightfall the next day, the ship had resumed her normal appearance. We were in a ton and a quarter of oil to the good. The black fish oil is of medium quality, but I learned that, according to the rule of roguery in all trades, it was custom to mix quantities such as we had obtained with better class whale oil, thus getting much higher price than it was really worth. Up till this time, we had no sort of an idea where our first objective might be, but from scraps of conversation I had heard amongst the harpooners, I gathered that we were making for the Carpe Verde Islands of the Azores. Now, that's an interesting point. Don't call me soon. That's funny, that's funny. No, the Azores, because that is where, in the 1970s, my grandmother, after she had started her business, my grandpa told her they were still whaling in the Azores, even back then in the 1970s. And so he told her, call their regional director, send $5 in the mail, and tell them we are looking for 500 pounds of whale teeth, sperm whale teeth specifically. And so they did. And when the whale teeth were finally delivered with the agreed upon price, they sold half of 250 pounds of the whale teeth and ivory to someone else on island who was not aware of it but could make use of it, in order to cut away some of their cost. And then they found a local artist who was he did all of the etching by hand. They hired a local man to sand by hand. Oh, hello, little Kahuna. Scared the crap out of me. Hey, guys.
Hey.
And Thorn, you'll have to be quiet for a second. And so we were yeah, they hired a local man to sand it, and it was just a nightly gig for him. So every night he would sit down with sandpaper or shark skin and sand smooth each individual sperm whale tooth. After that, they would ink one surface, and after that he would etch into all of that. Then they would heat up the ink, and the ink would flow into those crevices made by that, and the rest would be washed off. And that is how they did the etching. He did every single illustration he did of ships and whaling and islands and all that sort by hand without any reference and without anything of that nature. He did it all based on his own memory. And they are truly incredible. I will have to share some of that with you guys before we're done. I have a single unscrimshawed piece of whale tooth that my grandma was kind enough to share with me many, many years ago, as it is illegal to buy and sell now, or at least without certain precautions and circumstances. But guys, I think that since my children are up, I'm going to have to call it here. Aloha. Thanks for coming to my stream.
Bye.
Bye. Thorn, what do you say? Aloha. Good enough. Goodbye, guys, and good night. Love you all.
That was